Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Again, thank you to the Basque government, Bilbao, Spain, the EU, for having me here. I went to bed early last night, wanting to be here. I see that not everybody went to bed early, so people are still coming. But anyway, here I am. Thank you. It's my pleasure presenting today. And when the organizer gave me the opportunity to put together an aerospace panel in the day 4 of this conference, I thought to myself, well, everybody's going to be quite tired. So I'm not going to be very detailed or very academic in my presentation. What I'd like to do in this next 30 minutes is give everybody a walk around the US aerospace industry. And I think the walk around this industry is going to be very interesting for several reasons. One of them is because the aerospace and defense industry in the US is at a very important moment in its economic cycle. There's been a couple of things that make the aerospace industry in the US relevant, and we'll go over it. What we're going to go over is we're going to look at the different areas of aerospace and defense. We are going to look at commercial aviation. We are going to look at aerospace, defense, and security, which is a new dimension that started pretty much after the tragedy of September 11. And then we are going to also touch up on a very, very interesting development for any European aerospace and also non-aerospace stakeholder in the room that wants to know what's new and what is growing in the US. And the space industry, the commercial space industry, is certainly a development that I'd like to share with you and give you some visions and some dimensions on the opportunities that might have for you as a European stakeholder, whether you are an academic organization, government, or a private company. Not only if you are in the aerospace industry, but if you are not in the aerospace industry, I'm going to show you ways where the aerospace industry interfaces and plugs in to many other industries and many other areas. Today's theme is manufacturing, and we will touch on manufacturing. We will see what the aircraft manufacturers are doing, engine manufacturers. We will see that this is the strongest moment for aerospace manufacturing probably in history. 2012 was the strongest year in results for the aerospace industry. But we are going to see manufacturing also in a different way. We live in an interconnected world. Everything now, thanks to communications, thanks to the speed of satellites, and thanks to how we look the world literally from space, makes that there is no segment or no activity in a commerce chain, whether it's aerospace, whether it's automotive, anyone, there is no single segment that now has or can be treated in isolation. So we'll see today how manufacturing, which is the theme of today, interfaces with every other element of the commerce chain. You will receive this presentation, so there is density of data, and what I'd like to do is just highlight a few things, not to read from it. You will have the presentation as well as a white paper that explains even more context. And lastly, what we'll do today is I'll give you some recommendations that my last almost 30 years in the US have given me, some insights, some ideas. I'd like to leave you with practical tools that you can go back to your company or to your entities, whichever they are, in aerospace or not in aerospace. And maybe you can have some tools to do and make some decisions that could be practical. Like I said, the aerospace industry had its best year ever last year. It's an industry that is large, but not too large. The aerospace industry amounts to about 3% of the global GDP. And one could say, well, that's very small. But that's the direct impact of this industry. The indirect and induced impacts of the industry probably span more into the 10 to 20%, because as we all know, whomever drove here today in a car was using GPS. Whomever is emailing or texting right now is using technology that came from the space and aerospace industry. So the indirect and induced impacts of this industry are often understated and underestimated. That's why I'm very happy that the organizers of USA Week Europe chose half a day to dedicate to the industry. I'd like to make a point about when we talk about USA Week. In the aerospace industry, this century, since the year 2000, the geography of the industry has changed. When one talks about US aerospace defense and space industry. Now he's talking more about the US, Canada, and Mexico. In the NAFTA free trade zone, today Mexico is the fastest growing aerospace economy in the world. Not the largest, by far it's not. It's about $5 billion in exports, but it's the fastest growing at close to 20% per year. More importantly, when we add Canada, Mexico to the US, we are talking about over 60% of the global aerospace, defense, and space industry output in the world. So that's very important to keep in mind, because the US is the logical platform to those two other economies. And last, about the commercial space industry, that's probably the most promising, fastest growing segment on the industry. Since 2010, all the space economy literally shifts from a government focus and government entities producing those industries into the private sector. It amounts to about 10% of the global industry, but it's growing. It's growing rapidly, and some estimates believe that by 2025, the commercial space industry could be up to 20 or even more than the global aerospace industry. These tables show that 2012, almost $0.7 trillion of aerospace industry were in the US alone. This excludes Mexico and Brazil. But this is the table I'd like to show you. And this is extremely relevant for some reasons we'll explore later. This is the global aerospace, defense, and space industry in distribution. The US amounts for 54% of it. Europe amounts for 36% of it. So in the context of what we are discussing today, USA Week in Europe, if we put these two together, it's literally 80% of the global aerospace industry. And that's why it's extremely relevant in this moment, this decade, to have this conversation. Let's look about some trends, some opportunities, and challenges in the industry. We all hear about sequestration in the US, budget cuts. We have all heard about government shutdown. From the outside looking in, it might look like we have a budgetary problem or an economic growth problem in the aerospace industry. And in a way we do, but in a way we don't. Again, 2012 was the strongest year in history for the aerospace industry. What is happening in the US is that we certainly have budget reductions. We have to cut our deficit. However, with the budget we have, we are doing more. We are doing more for less. And for any European company considering manufacturing to the aerospace industry or performing any activity with the US, even though it's a huge market, the US is going to be extremely careful and extremely selective in who is coming in to take a market share, but who is bringing innovation and who is bringing more for less, different ways to do things. For instance, we just heard Boeing announce a new 777 aircraft about 3 months ago, the 777X. It's not a new platform, has some new parts, but what Boeing is doing is more with less. They are refurbishing or upgrading an old platform. We are going to see a lot of that in the US. The other very important development is that this word C4ISR, which stands for Command Communications Control Computers, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. It's a long word, it's a lot of letters in it, but it's a very, very important segment of the aerospace industry. It's the segment of the Defense Department that has increased its budget. And it's the segment of the industry that is growing and looking for partners anywhere in the world where they would add value. And when I say anywhere in the world, not everywhere. Europe, the European Union, yes, that's very important. And I say that because this decade is a very, very important decade, and we all have heard about the cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity problems, and also the ITAR regulations and the safety regulations and security between countries. Some countries have performed better than others. Intellectual property is respected more in some places than others. But certainly in Europe, we have a strong advantage into talking to the US and relating to the US from the same or similar legal frameworks, contractual rule of law, and from a democratic platform that makes, in my opinion, the European industry the prime candidate to partner with the US. And that's unique to this decade, and I encourage all of you to take advantage of that opportunity. So back to doing more with less. Let me show you an example of how the US government and the US air transportation industry is thinking about problems. As you know, same thing as in Europe, we have a congestion problem. The US needs to add 300 million passengers in the next 5 years, and they need to do so on a budget. So how do we add capacity without simply building new airports like some people are doing in the Middle East or in Asia, where simply there is greenfields everywhere where you can build 100 million passenger a year airport with ease? We cannot in the US. So let me show you an example of a creative solution that is taking place in the US right now. 8 airports in the US account for most of the delays in the air traffic. But we have more than 5,000 airports in the US. So here is an innovative development that is being planned for large airports that have a capacity problem where all the slots are taken, but the slots are a mix of big and small airplanes. Some of those airports, within about 100 kilometers, 60 miles of them, have an underutilized airport. An airport that has plenty of slots, but only has capacity for smaller airplanes. So what if we put a high-speed train between those two airports? So in the big airport, we have big airplanes. That gives us immediately a 30% boost in capacity, and the small airport, with plenty of capacity, handles the small airplanes. The studies show that if we do that, we can cater to 300 million more passengers in the US, and all we have to do is a high-speed rail line between airports. And you would say, but that's done. What's new about that? High-speed train between airports? You know, you leave the airport, get on a high-speed train, go to another airport. We're thinking differently. We are thinking a high-speed train that will connect the terminal, the gate areas of the airport. You probably have been in airports where you take a little tram and go from Terminal A to Terminal B. Consider now going on a high-speed tram from Airport A to Airport B, where Airport B now becomes the terminal of Airport A. So when we look at airports in the Miami area, in the San Francisco area, all of a sudden, with a terminal to terminal, not from the outside, but from the past security area, we just added 30% capacity to 2 airports, one of which was underutilized, the other one was congested. The cost advantage of this approach, probably more than 80% savings over building a greenfield airport. This example shows you the way of things to come in the US, the way of things, how things are going to be done, and who are the partners that we are looking for in the US. Innovative, creative, more for less, and certainly using what we have to our advantage. The EU advantage, I touched upon that a little bit, and I'd like to, I've been about 3 decades in the US, and I've seen the 80s, the 90s, 2000, I saw the Gulf War, I saw 9/11, 2 or 3 peaks and recessions. A lot of things have changed. There are some, in the 80s and 90s, we talked about geographical divisions. We talked about Europe, Latin America, the US, Middle East, Africa. As time has gone by, the way we look at aerospace in the US is not so much by geographies, but by polarities. And what I mean by polarity is by affinity of cultural, political, rule of law, commercial law, respect for intellectual property, technology. So the center of gravity of US relations in aerospace, with the partners the US industry is looking for, are partners from the EU. And why is that? Because we talk the same language. A contract is a contract in the UK, a contract is a contract in the US, with different yet very similar guidelines. So in my opinion, this decade is extremely favorable for the EU stakeholders to come in and take a good look, and also for the US investors, some of who are here today with us, to come to Europe and take a look at investable partners in an investable context that is mid to long-term stable. Another thing that in the defense area we are seeing is that the US is increasing its exports in military as a way to counteract for some of the budget cuts in its own country. But by doing so, they are starting to equip other countries with military systems. They are looking to do so in partnership with other countries. It makes no sense that I'm extremely strict about how I sell weapons to a country, yet another country here is doing it differently and is bypassing all my efforts to preserve safety and security of the world. So the philosophy is to increase exports, but not to do so alone, to do so in partnerships or collaborations with, again, friendly countries in the terms of polarity of cultures. And this is where the EU once more excels. So that's a very important point, which takes us to the emerging industry I was talking about, the commercial space industry. In my opinion, is the most promising blue ocean that we have in the aerospace industry. In my opinion, it's a growth industry. What's happening today in commercial space is no different than what happened in the 60s with the jet era, when we suddenly were able to cross continents non-stop in quiet comfort. We are seeing something like that happening now. And the case, there's a company called Virgin Galactic. You probably have heard, a company selling tourist tickets to go up into space. It's a UK ownership, UK-owned company, Richard Branson, but it's developing its product in the US. Not only that, it's compliant with all the safety and security regulations, and it's using a US company that just was acquired by a major defense contractor. This is what I'm trying to describe, how easily Europe and the US can work together, even in the most difficult, restricted, safety-sensitive context as it's the space industry. If I can leave you with a couple of thoughts, this is one of them. Air transportation is huge. 2 billion passengers travel every year on a fleet of 20,000 jets on a couple of hundred airlines. There's a supply chain, there is manufacturing to do, there is research and design, but this, at the top of the pyramid, is a growing top of the pyramid. So if there is an area to watch for, in my opinion, is commercial space. We talked about how the US is exporting defense with the right partners. This is where Europe comes into play. I'd like to point out that opportunities and risks. If you are a company selling to the US, aerospace or non-aerospace are related to aerospace, because now if you're an IT company, if you're an energy company, somehow you're plugging into the aerospace industry. The opportunities are that everything is up for bid again. Budgets have been changed, so you can come in, bid. If you are down selected, you can win. You can get new work. But there is a risk to European suppliers, and I've seen that oftentimes is the risk of placing all the bets in one client, in one supply chain, in one program. The weakness of the European aerospace industry as of the US is the size. We need more companies in the 1 to 5 billion in sales and in the 5 to 10 billions in sales. We have a lot of 0 to 1 billion and 5 billion and up in Europe, but the 1 to 10 billion is a no man's land, and I recommend anybody who is strategizing how to grow to fall somewhere into those two brackets, being invested through mergers and acquisitions or joint ventures. We talked about space, we talked about new technologies, how to access space, software, mission data, new technologies. We are looking at people trying to print fuel for rockets, print fuel for aircraft. So the fuel is organized internally in its molecules, more efficient, less consumption. And again, back to who are the ideal partners. In my opinion, the EU, after Canada and Mexico, which are the logical NAFTA traders, are the best partners. And as a summary, I'd like to point out that we are looking at a new normal situation. The aerospace, defense, and security industry adds another letter, the letter S for space. So we have a DSS now. It's a new industry, more for less, comply by the rules of the game. If you come to the US, the legal, tax, the infrastructure of the business, the way business is done in the US, is very specific, very simple in comparison to other frameworks, yet very strict. If you want to take the market share of the largest aerospace market in the world, you have to adapt to the rules of the game of the US. And in closing, I'd like to point out to the European American Enterprise Council in their task to precisely do that, to assist European companies build the bridge and build the bridge to close the gap and access the world's largest aerospace market. So that's US aerospace in 30 minutes. I told Herman, can I have a couple of days? He said, no, you have 30 minutes. So that's why I went a little bit fast. But I'd like to spend 4 or 5 minutes, I guess we have left on my time before the distinguished panel that comes after me, which, by the way, the people who you'll be hearing of today, if you put them together, they could run the aerospace industry of a small country. So before they come up, I'd like to ask the audience for questions, comments. I'd like to hear from you some of your explorations, ideas. I'd like to take with me to the investors I work with, to the people I work with in the US, your views. So, anybody? Back there?
Oscar, it was a fascinating idea, especially with the concept of the high-speed rail connecting mega regions as far as a regional airport and carriers. But obviously there's going to be a lot of, how should I put this, competing egos. I mean, I'm from Southern California, so I'm thinking about the airport situation within Southern California. LAX is booked over capacity, Ontario is almost shutting down. But to be able to bridge those two, even though that they're owned by the same corporation, would be a tremendous undertaking from I'm thinking a local government and also a state government standpoint. What do you think needs to be done to be able to sort of smooth the way and streamline this concept from a regulatory and governmental standpoint?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's you, Matt, right? Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. And that's again where politics mix with business and industrial development. I face that situation. My firm is based in Miami, Florida, and within 100 miles of Miami, we have 2 airports, Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, which are probably a tenth of the size of Miami International. Miami International will reach congestion in 2020, and these 2 airports have plenty of capacity. We're facing exactly that problem. 3 counties that are trying to do the same. No easy solution. Obviously, you don't change ways of thinking through generations. The approach we've tried in Florida, the approach I try personally in the groups I belong to, is to look at the world. When we talk about this issue, how to connect these 3 airports, and forget there are 3 counties, we just want to tell the world it's one mega region. You're talking about Miami, and you have 2 terminals, one in Fort Lauderdale and one in Palm Beach. We show them Sao Paulo. We show them a metropolitan area of 300 kilometers. We show them the London greater area where 5 airports are perfectly and seamlessly connected. We show them the Abu Dhabi-Dubai corridor of 100 miles where those 2 airports eventually, and are already talking about connecting to each other, the new Dubai airport. So the best approach we know is to show, look, this is how the world looks at Florida. They don't want to make distinctions between 3 counties that have historical competitive issues. They want to land in a place where it's easy to go to places, and it's easy to connect to places in a very smooth way. So global comparison works. It's working so far, but very slowly. Any other questions back there?
Oscar, Dan Pemberthy from Rand Capital. Question about the international increase in ship sets that are being produced worldwide, particularly in Asia, which could begin to rival U.S. production, and the opportunities for EU companies to expand into areas other than the U.S. into the aerospace manufacturing sector.
Back to the global polarity, yes, for sure. China is a great growth market. 1.5 billion people, out of which 80 million a year fly. We are 300 million in the US and 700 million fly. So it's inevitable that the growth is there. How many ship sets are we going to ship there from US, European, or American manufacturers, Canadian or Brazilian? The numbers are there. I believe it's 2, 3, 4,000 jets in the next 20 years. How many are they going to produce internally? Is that the question?
Yes. Yep.
So far, very little. So far, we haven't seen any jet production at the commercial level in China or India, for that sake, that meets international standards. So the indigenous industry being developed, we are watching. We believe it's going to happen, but not as fast, perhaps, as the timelines we hear with the C919s and the Irkuts in Russia, the new generation. I'm more in the 2025 to 2035 window for that. And even then, the competitive pressures, it's going to be very hard to compete. There'll be a healthy number of chipsets in the hundreds, maybe low thousands, but by then the other guys will be in the 4, 5, tens of thousands. So are they ever going to catch up? Good question. I don't know. If they do, it's not going to be anytime soon. Any questions, comments? Anybody here in the U.S. thinking, in Europe thinking about bridging the gap to the U.S.? Any questions, exploratory ideas? Well, we are almost out of time anyway, so I'd like to wrap up again, say thank you to the organizers, EAC, USA Week, and to all of you. If there is any follow-up you'd like to do offline, I'll be here today. I'm very happy to talk to you. And again, it's been a pleasure presenting today. Thank you.